as he slowly fades away out of the picture. Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. Where we couldn't get Eugene and Kevin together, we decided that we needed to invite a few more folks, and we'd like to welcome our friends Ben Weissman, Anthony Nocentino. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello. Howdy.
Oh, let's see. Hold on. There we go. Are you guys? Can we try that one more time? Can you guys say hello?
Hello.
Hello. It's
No,
still
I
me you're
can't.
looking for.
No. Okay. Let's see. So what about now?
Hello.
Are we good?
Hello. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, let's see. Why? Okay, hold on. I gotta add my.
A year of Zoom calls and then this.
Right.
That's right.
By the way, did you guys hear my GPS there?
Nope.
The vibrating?
I did not.
Okay, good. I was concerned that GPS would give away my location.
Oh,
Turn left now.
yeah.
Okay.
Considering you never give away your social media information when we're supposed to do that, I'm not too worried about the GPS being the one to rat you out.
Let's see. Is that any better? I guess. Can you hear me now?
We've always been able to hear you.
This is a yes. I know you can, but apparently the
Audience.
I
Our
made
live studio audience
the live studio audience is
may not be as
Hello,
loud.
audience.
Very good. Okay. Well, let's see. I think we have that. I think we are good to go, gentlemen. So okay. So welcome. We are
Hello.
actually excited to have you.
Hi.
Thanks for stopping by. What we wanted to do today is so Eugene was not super excited about our explanation of Azure Arc. And he's like, I feel like our listeners deserve better, Carlos. Right? We have certain
Well, when you compared it to
standards
Noah's
here.
Ark and said we just put two sets of containers one by one, it didn't feel accurate.
It was a little bit lacking
I mean-
here.
Yeah.
And so part of this is, it hasn't really been on my radar, right? I wasn't quite sure how the data community would react to this topic. And then lo and behold, I am told that two data platform MVP folks have actually written a
Internet
book.
raconteurs.
That's right. The Azure
Web.
Arc-enabled data services book. And I thought, okay, well, there you go. These guys have done, there it is. So we haven't talked about it, and I had forgotten you'd written the book, I'll be honest with you, until this morning as I was putting this together.
I
So
remember.
we're gonna
remember
give
Kevin.
away some
We're
copies.
friends.
Right? We're going to give away some copies of their book. We'll get them together.
Yay.
So we're going to have a, so let's see, if you're listening live, right, you can let us know you want a book. Otherwise, in the podcast, if you're listening to the podcast, if you go to the episode show notes for today's episode, there'll be a form. You can fill it out. And I think we're going to do, so normally we've been doing 10. First 10 people
Wow.
sign up, we'll send you a book.
I will sign up right now.
Put a prime number in chat right now. It won't actually get you a book, but I want you to put a prime number in chat.
Yes, to see if
Prime
you
number
can
in chat.
know your prime numbers. Okay, so Azure Arc ultimately is our topic today, right? We're
Sure.
very grateful to have Ben and Anthony here. So Ben, so not quite pulling the midnight out oil just yet. What time is it over there
Nah.
where you are, Ben?
It's 4:30, so
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's almost beer o'clock, right?
that's the thing. If we had already gone back from daylight savings, it would be beer o'clock. It's so sad.
Oh, there we go.
Another week until I can start drinking an hour early.
So before we
Hate when
get
that
into
happens.
our topic today, as always, compañeros, we have a few shout outs we want to give. So For those of you who are there at, go away. It's news. So for those of you who are there at SQL Trail, thank you. We have a couple of shout outs. Hilda Alvarez, Adriana Hernandez, Kevin Hinkins, Mala, Luther Atkinson, Keith Carlson, and Kelly Robertson. So thanks, compañeros, for engaging with us there in the event. For others that are giving us a shout out in social media, we've got Venkat Nara, Bill Coleman, and Andy Hart, Julia Rasmanica, Igor Katruka, Bill Ramos, and Kay Larkin. As always, compañeros, sorry if I got your names wrong, but thank you for engaging with us. And while we just got done with one SQL Trail, we can actually announce we're going to have the next one on June 15th. So there you go. Mark your calendars. And if you weren't there last time, I'm very interested to know why. It's a free event, compañeros. We know you're listening. I can see the counts, unless my mother has somehow figured out how to loop, the podcast and play it over and over and over. I know there are more of you out there. So why aren't you coming to SQL Trail? It's free. If there's a reason.
So assuming that Kev and I are going to be speaking again, were you planning on telling us the date, or we were going to find out through the podcast like everybody else?
Yes,
that's a deep assumption, Eugene.
Yeah, I know.
While we enjoy having you, we are actually looking for other speakers. In fact, my team has demanded that we open up for a call for speakers. So we are going to do that, and we'd love to hear from other folks, right? Now, Anthony,
maybe even people that have never spoken at another event before.
Yeah, there we go. This could be the first one.
Yes.
Now, speaking of events, Anthony, I know you guys are doing the 8KB, right? Do you have another date there? Is that a once a year thing? Have you guys migrated, or what's the?
So we're doing biannually. We're kicking around a date in the late June timeframe.
Okay, not the 15th, please.
Not the 15th, not the 15th. Yeah. But we haven't announced yet, but it should be something that you will all hear openly soon. So akb.online, since you brought it up, I'm going to tell people about the website, akb.online, to check out the event. So thank you.
There you go. Okay, very, very good. So,
speaking of events, shameless self-plug.
Of course.
Also in June, June 11th, we got Data Minutes going on. Call for speakers is still open. Go to dataminutes.io. I'm doing this with my friend William Durkin, who I'm also doing Data Grill and New Stars of Data with. And like all we do, it's a bit different. It's only lightning talks. You got 10 minutes for your session. So get those submissions in. It will be a lot of fun. We're looking at 50-ish sessions in a day in 2 tracks. So
oh wow,
this will be awesome.
I have submitted, and I was mocked for submitting a licensing talk. People think it can't be done. You can't fit Power BI licensing in 10 minutes.
That is technically not correct. A person has been marked for submitting a licensing talk. We never mentioned that it was you.
You're right. I apologize. People will make their own inferences, but there's plausible
you just
deniability.
Outed yourself, Eugene.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it will be. So that will be interesting. Now, have you done Data Minutes before? I feel like I've heard about it.
No, Data Minutes is the first time. We just concluded New Stars of Data, the 2nd edition, 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Which is an event that is exclusively for new speakers. Hence my comment on maybe get a new speaker for the next trade event. But we never did Data Minutes before. We were hoping to be able to do another Data Grill this year. And when we figured out, well, it's not happening because, COVID and stuff, we figured we had to do something else. So, and at the same time, we did not want to do just another conference. I mean, just like Anthony and his friends, like they're focusing like on really deep dive stuff. Or there's Matt Gordon with his very high level, entry level stuff, basically only 1 to 200 levels. I think this is really, if you're trying to do something bigger, not just like a handful of sessions, you really need to find any kind of sweet spot. And yeah, that's what we're trying there. Will be interesting how that works out with basically changing speakers, promoting a new presenter and everything like every 10 minutes. But let's see how it works out.
That sounds like fun.
The hosts are going to get a workout that day, that's for sure.
Exactly.
If there's anybody I would trust to pull it off, though, it's those two folks. They're pretty awesome, Ben and William. So good luck, guys. Oh.
Okay, so very good. Now let's get into our topic for today. And so I have to ask, perhaps before we actually get into Azure Arc, right? So when things clicked to me in taking a peek, preparation for this event, the scenario was presented. My company buys another company, and we're using a different cloud platform, right? Azure Arc to save the day. That makes sense to me. I'm like, okay. Now, where I find the disconnect is how did you two, right, data platform centric folks, decide, we need a book on Azure Arc, and we should write it?
Ben asked me.
True story.
So then, Ben, right? How did you decide? You know what? This Azure Arc thing is there's going to need to be something for data services.
So see, the thing is, when I write books, I just try to find topics where I know the book will completely be outdated by the time it has printed. I did that with big data clusters, so I figured I should do the very same thing on Arc.
Because they look good on the bookshelf, right?
True story.
It just gets me that second edition real quick. So no, but seriously, it is and I'm mainly focusing on the Arc data services thing. That's one distinction I think we may have to make for some of the listeners, that Azure Arc and Azure Arc-enabled data services is not the same thing. Azure Arc-enabled data services is a subset of Azure Arc, where Azure Arc could get you Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes or Azure Arc-enabled servers, Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, which is not the same thing like Azure Arc-enabled data servers. That's where it gets really complicated.
Okay.
In the end, the idea of Arc is to give you a centralized looking glass into your infrastructure.
Right.
So I got like 17,000 different SQL instances, some on-prem, some on AWS, some in the Google Cloud, some in some other private cloud, some on Azure, and I want to see them all in the same portal, stuff like that. Or I have the same thing for VMs, or you name it. That's the idea of Arc. And it was actually ticking off quite a couple of boxes to me when I first heard about it. It was like, okay, this is really, because there's so many people talking about, we're kind of moving to the cloud, but we're also kind of staying on-prem, and we're hybrid, and nobody knew how to manage all that. And that was kind of the end. It also, and Anthony, I'm sure you have something to add on that. It kind of was the answer to that question that, it was funny, when Anthony and I spoke about that, we had been asking ourselves the same question without discussing it together. Like, that's kind of the answer to the why Microsoft did all that SQL and Linux, SQL and Kubernetes and so on thing. Why did all of this happen?
So the book's really good, right? Obviously, because Ben and I wrote it, but the foreword is written by Travis Wright, who's the program manager over Azure Arc-enabled data services. And in the foreword, he takes you through that journey of let's put SQL Server on Linux. Let's put SQL Server in a container. Right. Let's put it in Kubernetes.
He was the program manager for Linux, and we had him on the program earlier. And so, I can see that. Yep.
And just that, like, that's hearing that story or reading that story is fantastic, especially seeing all the pieces of the puzzle kind of not leak out, but be published or released over the last couple of years since 2017. So things like Azure Data Studio makes sense now, right? Because I need a tool to manage this thing that could potentially be multiple data platforms and stuff like that. So it's really neat to see that all come together from an engineering standpoint. And also a vision standpoint. Imagine kind of like conjuring this up 4 or 5 years ago that this is going to be the problem that you need to solve in 2021 with, how many years of engineering time to get to this point. It's a fantastic feat by the product team.
So what you're saying is they have some smart folks over there.
A little bit. A little bit. Yeah. So,
but
that's how too. Yeah, that's how I got involved in just even in Kubernetes in general. I was at a Microsoft event a couple of years ago, and they were just talking about Kubernetes and the value that it provides in managing infrastructure and things like that. And I was like, that's going to be a thing, And so then pretty much on that flight home, I was downloading training material, buying books, and spent the next several months trying to learn about this thing that is Kubernetes, because it's going to be the common substrate that we're going to be deploying applications on pretty much for the foreseeable future, I think. And we see that. We see that with big data clusters, with Azure Arc-enabled data services, and it's becoming that thing that's managing the deployment of the application, right? And in this case, data services.
So we have a question from one of our listeners. So for shops using local VMs in SQL Server, does Azure Arc or Azure Arc Data Services give us the ability to use some Azure services? And I think we may not. So maybe let's connect another dot here. So you talked about Azure Arc, right? And then you mentioned, well, it's different from Azure Data Services, but I don't think we've actually defined what Azure Data Services is just yet. So maybe let's talk through that, and perhaps maybe it will help answer that Doug's question.
You want to grab it? Do you want me to grab it?
Go ahead.
Okay, so within Arc, right? Arc is the overarching umbrella. Let's be serious. There's Kubernetes, right? There's Kubernetes, right? So Azure Arc. The long story short about Azure Arc is it extends ARM to wherever you have stuff, right?
Oh.
And ARM gets you what? Deployment, right? As Ben alluded to earlier, inventory management, right? But then also configuration management, and you say operations, logging, performance, backups, all those different things that you would get from ARM, right? And so with Arc-enabled data services, we have the ability to deploy traditionally Azure PaaS offerings or platform as a service offerings wherever I have compute, more specifically wherever I have Kubernetes. So I can drop down a Postgres hyperscale server in AWS or a Postgres hyperscale server in an on-prem deployment, right? Or the VMs on-prem, wherever, or on a container ship in the Suez Canal. Anywhere I want to have data services, I can put that based on what Azure Arc-enabled data services provides. Also, I said Postgres hyperscale, we also have managed instance, right? So I can put SQL Server managed instance in Azure, on-prem, or in the Suez Canal, wherever I want to put it, right? And so that functionality is pretty mind-blowing if you think about it. But what I do need out of that is the management of that platform, right? I don't want to just drop it down to like, oh, I got managed instance in AKS or in EKS now in AWS, but I need to be able to manage it. And so I have the ability to use the tools that I would traditionally manage Azure resources with wherever I have that managed instance or wherever I have that Postgres hyperscale instance. And so I can control, deploy, audit, collect logs, automatically backup, which is a future feature, automatically update, which is a future feature, and things like that. But the stuff that you'd expect out of Azure wherever I have Kubernetes, right? Because that's that common substrate that allows me to deploy these things wherever I want. So that's data services, Postgres hyperscale and managed instance, right? So PaaS stuff wherever I want. There's this thing called Azure Arc for SQL servers too. So I can take a SQL server wherever it is, Amazon, Google, on-prem, install an agent, right? An Azure the extension, I think is what it's called in Azure, right? Which then would take that SQL server and register it with my Azure subscription. I can then assert policy on that SQL server wherever it is, right? I can manage configuration. I can manage assessments. I can manage best practices and skew from best practices and things like that, and start enabling the management of those instances wherever they are. Again, on-prem, in Azure, or definitely in Azure, but in Amazon or Google.
Sure.
And manage that SQL server. So that's another facet of Azure Arc. We talked about data services,
in that
and then there's
sense,
also Azure Arc for SQL servers.
To kind of jump on that, then, if I have enabled, or if I'm on premise, right? And the kind of the question is, well, hey, how could I start using Azure services? Well, one is, if you think you're going to get there at some point, you could go ahead and start developing what is going to be your common, maintenance, or your maintenance infrastructure, if you will, right? Like your policies and things like that. You can go ahead and start doing that instead of trying to apply, for example, like the SQL Server, policies and whatnot that would have to change from system to system.
And that's
you get all these. Sorry, you go ahead.
Okay, well, that's when I talk to like DBAs about this, like traditional on-prem DBAs. That's the angle that I take. I'm like, how many organizations have a cloud team? How many have a team that manages VMware? Or how many have cloud teams that manage AWS and another cloud team that manages Azure? Right?
Sure.
If you were a CIO, you're like, man, that costs a lot of money, right? And on top of a lot of money, it's different ways of doing things, right? The Google team's going to do it one way, the Amazon team's going to do it another way, the on-prem team's going to do it another way. Imagine if we can factor that out and have one way to manage the infrastructure, right? That's huge from a saving standpoint from people time, and also from operations, security, auditing, right? I just know where all my stuff is. So sorry, Ben, I'm gonna grab it. Go ahead.
I mean, some of Azure Arc-enabled data services are currently in preview, so some of the stuff that we're talking about isn't even in the product yet. But on the one hand, you get really stuff like automated updates, managed backups, stuff. So really just stuff that you don't have to care about anymore, even though you're still on-prem. But also, Carlos, like you described, you may start now on-prem with an Azure SQL Managed Instance. And then at some point, when you're moving completely to the cloud, because there's this thing called data gravity that kind of dictates where your data and stuff like data warehouse and everything should live. It doesn't make sense to have like your whole huge operational databases on one location and then the analytical stuff on the other one, because you get all that latency and everything in between. At some point, it might just move over. So you're already on the right product. So you're really just pushing that product kind of from one Kubernetes cluster to another. And another value that we should not underestimate, how do you pay for SQL Managed Instance? You pay for it resource-wise. So you get something like, billing hasn't really been announced or worked out yet, but it will be something that works on a consumption basis. I think that's something we will know for sure, given where everything with Microsoft and everything, and that is something you would never get from an on-prem SQL Server. So if you have that one machine that you just need to scale up for, like that 1 day per month or whatever, that might be the way also to give you that flexibility, even if you're not in the cloud yet.
So you've mentioned Kubernetes a couple of times, right? And
Drink.
So, so if I am going to dip my toes in here, does that mean that I'm going to get Kubernetes all over me?
And do you have to see a doctor about that?
Hey, and Kevin, I forgot to mention, Kevin and Eugene are still here. Yes, thank you for that.
That's good. Kevin. I've been learning. A lot of this is clicking, so this is good.
We haven't been fired yet.
Sorry, Kevin, you broke up.
You know when Kevin said we should keep him on the call until the audio quality gets bad? I think it is now.
Yeah. I think he says we haven't been fired yet, is I feel like what he was trying to say is he entered like the maximum.
Isn't it ironic that this sentence is what gets him actually fired?
Yeah.
That wouldn't be the first time, no. Okay, please go ahead, though.
So is the question, do I have to learn Kubernetes? Is that kind of where you're heading?
Yes, I mean, so if I'm going to get serious about, again, here's the future, right? So you've laid out basically like, hey, organizations are going to be different, right? And I know that higher ed, government, right? And that's its own different ball of wax. But assuming that I'm going to working for a larger organization, again, like that initial scenario that made a lot of sense to me is my company buys another company, right? Even if my company has nothing to do with using a different platform, I could have to interact with it as a result of an acquisition, right? Which makes a lot of sense. So so the question is okay, I want to start with Azure Arc. Do I really have to start with Kubernetes?
So I told you my journey was I saw this thing Kubernetes and I was like, yo, that's going to be a thing, right? Yeah. But I put myself in a bucket of the systems DBA. Like I want to understand where the bits and the bytes flow. Like that's my jam, right? And I really enjoy that kind of stuff. Now, there are people that just consume SQL Server, right? They're developer DBAs, there's data architects and things like that. Maybe not. They don't really care. They just want to do AZ, create, manage instance, and boom, and have it show up. That's fine too. But we're going to have to solve, we're solving different problems. They want to focus on, developer DBAs, et cetera, want to focus on the data. I want to focus on making things rocket fast and highly available. And that's, so, and do you have to become an expert at Kubernetes? No, I don't think so. But it depends on what your goal is or your approach is when you are building and architecting systems, right?
Yeah. Well,
I think, if I may add to that, think of a traditional Windows SQL Server. You can just go ahead and have any kind of Windows VM that doesn't care about any best practices when it comes to performance or anything, and you can just click next, next, next on the wizard, and you got SQL Server up and running. And basically, you can do the very same thing with Kubernetes. Or you dive deep and start understanding how storage in Kubernetes works, how everything ties together. And depending on if you're just running a small mini application that doesn't even need to perform super well, then you don't have to dive into Kubernetes. If you have that SQL Server that keeps running into locking situations and blocking and stuff, and you have got all these weird wait types going on, where you would, even in a Windows world, dive deeper and start looking what's happening on my storage subsystem, what's happening with my memory, what is everything distributed to the right disks, do I even have the right disks in there? You got the same challenges, but just kind of using a different, I'd even call it operating system. I mean, technically Kubernetes is not an operating system, but that's kind of where it steps in. That's kind of the layer you're building on.
Yeah, I having gone through this conversation now, I think the question, am I going to have to learn Kubernetes, misses the point a little bit, right? Because I was definitely in the same boat at the beginning, where it felt like this Azure Arc stuff was this weird, like, semi-attempt to containerize SQL. Like, yeah, we had Docker containers. I've used them for spinning up like demo environments when there's like a CTP out and I don't want to contaminate my machine, right? But having this conversation, it feels to me that Azure Arc is less about, hey, containers are the cool new hotness and everybody has to use them, and much more of 5 years ago, would you have been asking, hey, do I have to learn VMware, right? Because when I worked at a day job, our SQL servers were on VMs on VMware. And for me, the answer was, for the most part, no, right? Like, honestly, the closest I came, we had some performance issues. The real problem was that I only had 8 gigabytes of RAM in my SQL server, right? It wasn't a VMware problem. It was dude, I was like 2 years out of college.
RAM in my phone.
Yeah. I know. I was like 2 years out of college, and I had to learn how to read like the PLE perfmon stats so I could prove that maybe we needed 16 gigabytes of RAM instead of 8, right? But that's the thing, is like, you know, if you're the kind of person that 5 years ago was attending a David Clee session so you could figure out like how to lock pages in memory, or I don't know, I haven't been a DBA in years. You know, if you were that person, then Azure Arc makes perfect sense for you. But if you never had to worry about that underlying substrate that was supporting everything, it's probably not going to matter to you too much. I mean, to me, this sounds like it's like how we had to deal with VMware, but it's more portable, it's more modular, it's more contained, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, let's flip that scenario though, because we're focusing on like performance and configurations and things like that. But let's look at it from another perspective. What you didn't get with VMware is really good ways to code and deploy your environments. It was a lot of next finish, like GUI stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
like they had PowerShell commandlets, and you could try to learn them, but yeah.
Right. But the foundation, like one of the core principles of Kubernetes, is this concept called declarative configuration and desired state, right? So I'm going to write code that says, give me 3 managed instances with this disk topology. And I don't care where it lands in my infrastructure to an extent.
Right.
Or what exact LUN it's going to land on. I know that maybe I need 4 CPUs per server, 16 gigs of RAM, and I want tier 1 SSDs coming from this storage pool over here, right? And Kubernetes will just go and figure that out for me. And I'm going to take that code, and this is the important part, and take that code that described that environment and put that in source control. And now I have a document that describes my entire data platform, right? Right. That's where it gets to be super important and mind-blowing, because now this is this thing that represents my current state. Then I can come back later and make changes to that state. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to change that code, leave it in source control, and deploy. Or I can go one step further and extend that to this thing called GitOps, where it's monitoring that repository. I check the code in, and then that code that's checked in is affected in my cluster inside of Kubernetes and just goes, right? And it makes those changes. And then we can start managing the state of our data platforms in source control, which is fantastic because it's reproducible and it's something that I can go and do over and over and over again, but also I can manage the configuration over time. And that's like a mind-blowing way in how we've deployed systems traditionally, because for years and years and years as DBAs, give me a VM, Windows team. Cool, here's your VMs. Go install SQL Server. Next, finish.
Yep.
Right? Go restore your databases, T-SQL scripts, yada, yada, yada. Right? But now we can have all of that in one contained place. I didn't want to use that word there, but it did. Contained. And then deploy. Right? And that's the other huge element. So we focused a lot on systems, but also think about it from the other perspective, right? In deployment and configuration management, things like that. So,
I mean, everyone's talking about CI/CD, and this is kind of the part that bridges the gap for the infrastructure part of the CI/CD.
Yeah.
Right. It sounds like it's trying to bring a lot of stuff that people are doing with ARM and Terraform and all that stuff back down off the cloud and to on-premises and that sort of thing,
Exactly.
or whatever cloud you're using. So it's I'm laughing a little bit because it sounds almost like I've started looking into Terraform, and it's funny because they try to make it generic, but every cloud's different, so they have to have specific providers and things for those clouds. And it feels like Microsoft's approach to that problem is like, oh, instead of making it generic, we'll just put ARM everywhere. Is what it sounds like.
Yeah. But even within Kubernetes, that's a challenge.
Sure.
Because eventually you have even an abstract platform like Kubernetes where you're just defining code, give me these things. At some point, you got to get a disk from something, and you got to get an IP address from something, right? And there's real infrastructure involved eventually.
Yeah.
Sure. So back to the on-premise piece. So if for folks who wanted to dabble in there, right, and you mentioned the extension, right, for the local VMs, is that, I guess, can you give us the nickel tour off the top of your head, right? How would somebody go about 1, 2, 3 get started?
Go for it.
Grab that one.
Go for it.
Okay.
Oh.
So I actually have not played with the SQL Server extension that much because I've been laser focused on this Kubernetes Azure Arc-enabled data services thing. But long story short, it's exposed as like an Azure IaaS extension that you can download and install in your system and then register back into your subscription. And then you can start managing your environment in that way. We can definitely add, I know there's documentation supporting it on docs.microsoft.com. So we can add that to the links for the show if we need to route viewers to that information.
Okay.
And to be quite honest, I've quickly played with it and then I've abandoned it again because the whole idea of Azure Arc-enabled data services versus just Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, you get so much more added value out of it where I'm like, hey, when I basically just change that command a slight little bit, you get the same connection back to the Azure portal and everything. You can still see all your metrics and logs in the Azure portal and stuff, but you also get that stuff that I've mentioned earlier, like managed updates, managed backups and stuff. If I have that connection already, why would I even want just a normal SQL Server just to show up on the portal? Why wouldn't I go the extra mile and also use the PaaS offering stuff like managed updates? And again, the answer to that question may actually sit in billing. I know Eugene is very passionate about questions on licensing, so.
No, 10 minutes passionate, right? Let's not
right.
get carried away here, right? 10 minutes passionate.
Well, until they released Power BI Premium per user and ruined my whole a seat analogy. So now I have to come up with like a first class bus, and it's a pain.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry for the tangent. Go on.
No. Okay, so I guess talk to me about other scenarios, right? So what are the? Because I know you. Let's see. At least I know, Anthony, you're consulting. Ben, are you a consultant as well?
Yes.
Okay, so talk to me in some of your engagements, right? Under what circumstances are you talking to your companies and being like, hey, let's take a peek. Let's start putting some money in the budget, right, for Azure Arc. Data enabled services.
That's the thing. You don't even put money in the budget because we will have to see how exactly the billing part works out, because if you get an MI on if you get a regular managed instance in Azure, you pay a fixed price per, I think it's paid per minute or hour. I'm not sure how exactly they break it down, but well, doesn't really matter. That includes infrastructure and licensing and the
can't do
managed
the
part and
vCore,
everything. And obviously, if you deploy it on your own infrastructure, that infrastructure part will go out. It will be interesting to see how much they're going to discount the Azure MI part by accounting that you're bringing your own infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they will obviously have to account for that in some way. The question is by how much. So that will also kind of give us an insight on how much Microsoft thinks their infrastructure is worth versus how much their software is worth. Is Microsoft still a software company? Welcome to my TED Talk. But in theory, unless you let's just start with a traditional migration thingy, then you already kind of have a budget that includes SQL Server of some kind. So you're still going with SQL Server. The first big change is you're going from CapEx to OpEx. So instead of buying a piece of software, instead of buying a new SQL Server core license for X amount of cores and whatever, you just change that to a consumption-based payment model, which
So is that
most CIOs and even more CFOs appreciate a lot, to say the least.
really? So I have the opposite effect. Everybody wants to capitalize everything, right? Operating expenses are like, no, that's sunk costs, right? Like, they get the deductions on the capital side, right?
Well, it depends on kind of who you talk to, and I talk to some customers that are like, yeah, no, we should buy that because if we buy it, then it will not actually come out of my budget because
Yeah.
and
that's right.
if we have that running as OpEx, that's a huge deal because then it will hit my bottom line. I'm like, yeah, well, that made sense like a couple of years ago. Maybe you just need to start rethinking about all the flexibility you get out of that and then just either adjust your targets or have that flow into a different bottom line or let that run into a different cost, whatever. But just because you're incentivized by certain financial metrics, which does make sense, well, if your whole project and your whole infrastructure and everything becomes more agile, maybe those metrics should become more agile as well. So don't let that be the breaking point of not moving to any kind of, because if you're following that logic, we will all stay on-prem for the next 200 years. Because
I'd like to stay on-prem
whichever
for
way you
200
move to a
years.
consumption-based billing model, you will always have that hit your OpEx, not your CapEx.
Sure. I guess I'll only say in defense of that idea that there's a reason why Microsoft is now, hybrid actually makes a lot more sense, right? Whereas, the 5 years ago, they were like, everybody's going to the cloud and just going to consume everything, right? And now they're like, oh yeah, hybrid.
Well, I think everybody went to the cloud, but not everybody went to Microsoft's cloud. So now you have people being like, well, either we are that big that we cannot just rely on one single vendor, because what would you do? I mean, this is a super theoretical case, but just imagine one day Azure Active Directory goes dark for a couple of hours. Not that this ever happened except for last week.
In January, did it happen? Yeah.
I do not want to rely on a single cloud provider. So, hey, it was not DNS. Shut the front door.
There's an Azure service called Front Door too, just saying.
I know that was kind of, I mean, the joke only gets funnier when you explain it, Bye, Anthony.
Bye. I'm out.
No, so you want to have a multi-cloud strategy, or there's just some stuff where you're regulated to stay on-prem because you're running a nuclear power plant, and for some reason people think it might be a good idea to actually not have that thing being exposed to the internet, or of that thing not potentially being affected by a network outage or whatever it might be. Well,
Never heard of Stuxnet.
I'm just making stuff up.
Just use
still,
theoretical examples.
There might be some things you could still get out of that. So, yeah.
Okay. So, then I guess, so give me some scenarios, right, in which you're like, okay, this is, I guess we've talked about the management pieces of it. Maybe other hurdles that you've come in contact with. I guess I'm just trying to think of use cases, how people, so as listeners of the podcast, right, if they have to go and make the case to their management, what are some things they should consider? I guess is my question.
I think the unified management interface is a huge deal breaker. It may not sound that big because you're like, yeah, okay, I'm getting an Azure portal that shows my on-prem SQL Server. Big deal. It is a big deal because you're getting one central looking glass into all your SQL Server CPUs and all your SQL Servers log file, stuff like that. You get a centralized looking glass for billing. So from the commercial aspect, same thing. You get, like I said, managed updates for all your SQL instances. If you're a small shop, you may not even have the manpower of someone that actually knows what to do with that. And if you're a huge shop that's running like 10,000 SQL servers, it just makes a huge deal not having to patch all of these things manually. So I couldn't even come up with, well, you have to be at least this big to go on that ride. Very small companies that do not have any kind of dedicated infrastructure teams, maybe even, perfect for them because they don't have to worry about it anymore. Super large companies, because it gives them the option to actually go multi-cloud, even multi-private and public cloud, or some whatever kind of hybrid approach, and get all of that together. So going forward, I mean, Anthony and I, we did that pre-con at the last ever past summit. We were basically talking about Kubernetes, and the exact title was, I think, the future of modern data platform application deployments, something along these lines. And I really think that this is where it is going. And then when you see the stuff that you need to do to kind of deploy a SQL Server yourself, just in containers, gets a bit easier on Kubernetes, and it even gets a bit easier in Arc. So while it, on the first look, it sounds more complicated, actually it's bringing so much stuff for you together that it's making things so easy. I mean, you can deploy that, a SQL Server, right out of Azure Data Studio.
In a matter of minutes, yeah.
Wow.
And when I talk about like declarative code a little bit ago, and even I do like sessions on how, like, an introduction to Kubernetes, I do a compare and contrast, because I've written a bunch of code to deploy SQL Server in DSC or with DBA tools, Arc DBA tools. But it's that deployment model will get you, at best, the absolute best I've ever deployed a SQL Server programmatically on Windows in VMs is 2 minutes, right? Which is rocket fast.
That's
right?
really fast. Yeah.
Right. And I'm still burning a 60 gig VM template to support that thing, let alone like what I actually need for my data. In Kubernetes or in containers or even in Azure Arc-enabled data services, if I type, give me a SQL server, right, the correct commands to do that, we're about a minute away from that. But also the surface area is a lot narrower. The size of a container is in the single gigabyte range, right? And so it's just a different way of thinking about systems and deployment. But then really the key elements,
running
though,
Windows containers.
Yeah, that's a thing. Not on SQL Server, it's not a thing. But the real secret sauce there is that code that describes that configuration, right? And so that's a big switch, right? And then getting away from the management of that single VM, right? And patching of that single VM or the hundreds of VMs that I have to support, giving that to a platform to manage decouples me from that, so I can start focusing on other things that provide more value to my business. And that, if you talk about like what's the pitch to an org, that's the pitch to an org, right? I could start focusing on making queries faster or writing reports that provide more value to the business versus spending my Saturdays patching my servers, and on a Monday cranky because I had to work on Saturday and I write crappy reports, right?
Sure.
Or whatever my job is.
Right.
And that's when I envision it and I talk to C-level people, that's the problem that's being attacked, is the operations problem, so that your high value employees, because we all make a lot of dough, we're all high paid employees in this data platform universe, shifting towards focusing on higher value problems, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I wonder I wonder what organizations, because we could come up with this model, right? I'm sure that it's out there, but I feel like, and I'm tangenting slightly. So we have been supporting so like clinics and things in the healthcare space. So there's lots of businesses out there that have had to purchase SQL Server because the software provider that they have to buy from, in this case, electronic medical record, right, requires them to have this infrastructure, right, that they now own and have to manage, and they're not in the business of managing that infrastructure. So now, obviously, right, software as a service, that's why everybody's kind of moving to the cloud. But I wonder, I shouldn't say moving to the cloud. Everyone is using cloud, right, applications now to help kind of solve some of that problem. but I wonder if there isn't, for those that haven't quite figured out how to make that leap, right? That could be an interesting, proposition for those folks to be like, hey, you know what? Let me just take all your infrastructure and, you pay a monthly fee for it, right? And you can kind of get to the latest and greatest, and
yeah, there's good. I mean, if you think about what you're enabling, is really the management infrastructure. So I could, and there's certainly a business opportunity here for the folks that want to do this.
sure.
Let's say you're a healthcare clinic that's got 100 sites. If you're a healthcare clinic, you don't really want to care about your infrastructure, but you have to.
No, that's right.
And then depending on your business model, you're going to pay somebody to manage it for you, right? And so what if you had the ability to manage all 100 clinics' infrastructure the same way programmatically in code, right? I have a Kubernetes cluster potentially in each site that I can then programmatically manage in the same way, in a very efficient ways with all these tools and things that we've talked about. That's a very valuable proposition, right? Because you can manage larger infrastructures. And it's the reason why I learned PowerShell 4 or 5 years ago. I wanted to be able to manage larger systems, and the only way to do that is programmatically in code, right? And so it's the same concept here. So that's the value prop for some orgs. Another common example is retail stores, right? Retail stores have infrastructure to support things in the stores, right? So things like restaurants or places that sell clothes, they all have cash registers, right? Those cash registers don't want to have to be attached to the cloud to make a sale, right? If the internet just goes away at that site, they still want to sell stuff, right? And so that's another use case for orgs, is disconnectedness of things, but still getting cloud infrastructure, services, all the things that we've been talking about. Container ships, right? Not even kidding, container ships. Having a cluster on there, they pull up the port, they sync some stuff, they go back out, right? And that's common deployment patterns that we'd see for this type of tech, right? Why is it so quiet?
Yeah, that's very cool. So I guess, Ben, right, I guess I feel like I need to get you into the conversation a little bit here, right? Don't want to neglect you.
I could listen to Anthony for hours, so.
Hey, there you go. Yeah,
He does.
Hey,
I told you I talk a lot.
all that podcast experience, right? I need to take lessons. I keep telling my compañeros, the listeners, that I have an editor mostly for me. My guests and whatnot do a much better job of explaining things than I do. Right. So I guess. So you mentioned, we are in preview with a lot of these things, right? Or have we gone release just yet?
No, we're in public preview, so everybody can use it. Nobody has to pay for it.
There we go. So we're going to encourage everybody, one, to get your book, and then two, right, try it out.
Even better, be one of the first 10 people to fill out the form and get that book for free.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or use 2 different email addresses and get 2 copies of the book like I did.
But then go and buy 4 copies.
Yes.
Or do that. Okay.
Also, email 5 people and make them buy copies, or else they will have bad luck.
So much this.
Okay, very good. I guess other thoughts, closing thoughts here before we wrap up and do SQL Family?
Yeah, I mean, I found this helpful, right? Because before it felt like, I don't know, the third or fourth weird containers thing that they were doing, right? There was SQL on Linux, and then Docker containers, and then big data clusters, and then this. And so now it helps a lot to be like, okay, if there was a situation in the past where I might have been dealing with VMware or Hyper-V, like this fits in that area, but it adds a bunch of things that were just really untenable, like the infrastructure as code kind of piece. And so that helps a lot. So I found this helpful.
Cool.
Okay. Well, again, thanks again for the conversation. So, compañeros, you can check out the show notes, which are going to be at now. Anthony, Ben, you guys let me know if I need to change my URL here. So sqldatapartners.com/Azure Arc is what we're going to call it. So should it be Azure Arc Data Services? All of a sudden that sounds kind of long. but I will change it. If you
I
want me
think
to.
I'll accept Azure Arc just for the reasons of simplicity and people
Yeah.
being able to find it.
There you go. Okay, I like it. SQLDataPartners.com/Azure Arc. You go there, fill out the form. Once we get that up, and we will, if you're one of the first 10, we'll send you a book.
All right.
Okay, so with that, let's do SQL Family.
Whoop, whoop.
So let's see. You guys can crisscross, but tell us how you first got started with SQL Server.
Well, for me, that was the logical next step. Back in the 90s, when I was working my first ever job, actually, instead of being a paper boy, I was always kind of lazy and didn't want to go out in the sun. So I was working at an ISP and was running a couple of websites for them. So I was working with Microsoft Front Page 1.0.
Showing your age.
Says who?
Right.
But having that said, Anthony's older than me. So one of the things I did there was running a little website where we basically think of early stages content management system, where we were just collecting all kinds of links and contents around the topics of internet security, which was not that big of a deal back then because there weren't so many smart, bad people out there. And I was like, okay, I don't actually want to go back to that website and keep editing it. So I kind of need my content management system. And my content management system back then was an Access database. And I kind of applied that same logic to a couple of other things that I kept going. And then those internet portals I was building got bigger and bigger. And believe it or not, but Access does not cope too well when it gets hit by a couple of million requests at more or less the same time. I had no idea. And I kid you not, my first migration to SQL Server, I was using back then in Enterprise Manager, I think it was. It was SQL Server 6.5. Was it Enterprise Manager, or did that come with 7.0? I'm not sure. But anyways, I was using the import wizard from Access into SQL Server without, I'm sorry, Anthony, that's what I did. It worked. And so, but it was a kind of logical evolutionary step from Access as a database. So yeah, I've said it, Access as a database. And then over time, well, web development wasn't that big of a thing anymore, and it was moving more and more to the analytics part, building data warehouses, building BI systems, but SQL Server was here to stay. So
very cool. Anthony?
So yeah, back in the mid 2000s, I was a developer. Like I wrote code for a living. And so I had to build stuff, right? And I had to stick the data somewhere, and it happened to just be a SQL Server. But what I learned quickly though is that the code that I was writing, people were complaining that it was slow, and I was like, I don't like that. How can I make this stuff faster? And so then I was like, hey, this is a SQL Server. And I was like, oh, look at that thing. It doesn't have any backups. It's a single instance. And so I'm like, how am I going to make sure that one business stays online and doesn't lose data? And so then I just dove deep into the database systems part of things, learning what indexes were and all that fun stuff. And so I just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into how SQL Server worked. And then I shifted from developer Anthony to systems Anthony, which I described earlier, right? I focus on how things move around and make, things more efficient. So that was kind of my first step into that. That was like mid 2000s. So SQL 2005, I think it was the first time.
Just because you started on a later version does not make you younger, just saying.
So technically, the first version that I worked with was either 7 or 6.5, but I had all my job was to build the Windows part and give that to the people that installed SQL Server. Yeah, I had to sleep on a data center floor while I was restoring. A database was restoring back when there was those direct attached storage arrays with drives in them with all the lights blinking. Yeah, so that was the first
fun time.
Yeah, the first time I really dove in was in the year 2008 on SQL 2005.
So is that the way that we should really tell the amount of experience you have, right? Sleeping on the floor versus sleeping in a cot, right? So
right.
I have since upgraded and now have a cot in the office that I.
And it was like a raised floor data center, so air was
super cold
stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right.
That's funny. Okay, so I know both of you you mentioned consulting, right? But what advice would you give to someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
Give me the sign to go ahead again.
Yeah, you go first.
Well, without sounding cheesy, just don't be afraid of making mistakes. I think that's the most important part, and try not to follow every rule that people out there think are right for you. But focus on learning what you're passionate about. If you're in the luxurious position to actually be able to pick what you have to do for a living, I mean, that is one of the parts where I feel very privileged that I can actually, even after all these years, not as many years as Anthony, because again, he's older, but me being able to focus on stuff that I love doing, working with people that I love working with, without having to follow, well, you have to do this and this specific path and you need this and this specific degree and blah. No, do what makes, and if something doesn't work the way you want, or something just doesn't work out, well, try it different, try something I think it was like 10 years or so ago at one of the Microsoft, back then it was the partner conference until they changed it to Inspire. They had Sir Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Airlines, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Records and stuff. And he was telling about, at that time, I think it was around 700 companies that he founded. And out of those 700 companies, more than 400 had failed, which is way more than half. Well, it probably helps if you got a couple of ideas that actually turned out to be literally billion-dollar ideas, because it helps you financing those failing ideas. But just because you're failing with something, it doesn't matter. Try it again, try it different, or if it just doesn't work, try something else, but just keep doing what keeps you happy. And on the long run, that is what pays the dividends.
It's so tough because it's very easy to compare, right? And you're like, I mean, so both of you, right? I mean, you know, having you been on this program, right? I've seen you in the community, right? I mean, you guys are much smarter than I am. It's so hard to be like, well, gosh, man, Anthony's doing this, right? Or man, Ben's doing this. I'm like, oh gosh, they just have another book. Do I need to write another book, right? Like, and you can get lost sometimes in trying to figure out what other people are doing, right? But I guess that idea of you just keep chugging along in what you want to do can be challenging sometimes.
Yeah. So in that vein, like the number one thing for me, honestly, is take care of yourself. Like first, your mental health, your physical health, because what we do, like we all work really hard. And what's the first thing that goes? Your physical health and then your mental health, right? And then that take care of yourself first. And in that vein, like don't compare yourself to other folks, right? Do what makes you happy. I just like Ben, I'm just super fortunate to be able to do have a job that I'm doing the exact things that I want to do, play with computers, make cool content. Like I'm, super fortunate and blessed to have that, right? And trying not, especially as I've gotten older, I've realized this, not comparing myself to others. But yeah, obviously you want to see what other folks are doing because it can help motivate you in a positive way too.
Sure,
right?
There's no question.
But my number one thing is take care of yourself, because I've tripped up and I've made all the mistakes of working too much and all that, and it can be challenging. So that's, if you want to go down this path of consulting and all the stuff that like Ben and I have been doing, that's my number one piece of advice.
Very cool. Now, having said that, right? You want to take care of yourself. What's one thing that can instantly make your day better?
Hanging out with my kids. They're awesome.
How
right?
many kids do you have?
Simple as that. I have 2.
Okay.
So, yeah, Legos, video games, all that stuff. That kind of stuff just changes your perspective. So,
sure.
Speaking of, one just walked in to get a print job. See?
Hey, there he is. Yeah, I was gonna say you must not have teenagers, right? When they're younger, very fun to hang out with, right? Then all of a sudden they become teenagers and they're like, you look at them, what do you want? Oh God. Hello, good night. Anyway, go ahead, Ben.
Chatting with Anthony.
Oh.
He does have
that like having a kid.
Yeah.
Right. Although he's made the point that I'm older a couple of times now.
And wiser, I'm sure, right?
You're gonna get the dad. You're gonna get the deep dad voice. Yes.
Okay, you have $10,000. what computer or tech would you buy?
You're a year late with that question. I mean, a year ago, I would have said, well, I need some key lights. I need some 4K cameras. I need a proper microphone. I need a green screen. I need a rendering PC. Well, you're one pandemic too late. I got all this now, so.
That's the
But
best
having
answer
that
to
said,
that
I'm just going to
question.
take the 10 grand and buy Legos.
Right.
There you go.
Well, then again, I kind of did that too over this pandemic, but that's a different story, I guess.
I would take the 10 grand and buy a ticket to an island without an internet connection, right? or like wire cutters to get rid of my internet connection.
There you go.
But then I'd have $9,999 left.
I was going to say, you're buying wire cutters for 10 grand? What kind of wire cutters are those?
They probably can,
The
honestly.
value
probably can,
proposition,
so.
man. There, it's like,
They're gold-plated monster wire cutters.
I was gonna say,
Right.
hey, for that, I'm sure I can find something, Anthony. Right? We should hook up afterwards.
I will gladly sell anyone $10,000 wire cutters. Go to my Amazon store.
Which famous person in history would you want to spend the day with? You're up first,
Can I
man.
split that day, like spend the morning with Bill Gates and the afternoon with Michelle Obama? That
I'm
would
gonna
be cool.
split- Okay, man, you're taking our question and you're like, one person is a whole day, right? I'm a kind of a half day kind of guy, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, I'm pretty sure Bill Gates is way too busy anyway to spend a whole day just chatting with me. So I'm kind of giving him the afternoon off, but at the same time, I kind of need to be entertained. I'm high maintenance. So, and I mean,
Michelle Obama, full of energy, right? She'll
exactly.
help you make sure you eat the right.
I'm pretty sure she's super fun to hang out with. Plus, she's got probably a story or two to tell. So,
Yes, I'm sure she does.
so Michelle, if you're listening, I'm here. Let's hang out.
I don't think this is her crowd. I could be wrong. There may be things I
You
don't know about her.
know that.
She's got her own podcast. She's not listening to ours, right? That's the problem.
But if you are, we'll get you on as a guest, right?
Yeah,
Special treatment. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Can you imagine? That'd be awesome. Can I just yeah. So
Anthony?
for me, it's tough. Like I love cooking. So like Anthony Bourdain would be probably my number one person, have a good time, learn how to cook, things like that.
Sure. That's interesting. Okay. Our last question, gentlemen, for you today. What is your favorite ice cream topping?
Don't take it away, Anthony. Come on.
Oh, they like this really good candied strawberries, like the real sugary ones. Yeah. All day. Yeah.
On what kind of ice cream, though?
Oh, vanilla, dude. Let's be serious.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. Good stuff though, not like the cheap stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm from Europe. We don't do ice cream toppings because our ice cream here is so amazingly amazing from Italy. We don't need to put anything on it to make it even more amazing. So, no offense.
Hey, that's right.
But
Just get the good stuff right to begin with, and you don't have to worry about the toppings.
Lemon basil gelato, fantastic. Check that out. Yeah, I want to come back, Ben. I want to come back. So
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you. We appreciate the conversation. As always, compañeros, thanks for tuning in. We mentioned we're going to have the book available if you want to hit out the show notes. But if folks want to catch up with you, Ben or Anthony, on social media, how can they do it?
Well, we're both on Twitter, at Nocentino or at B. Weissman. We are both on LinkedIn under our real names, Anthony Nocentino and Ben Weissman. So go find us there. Let's chat.
Mr. Eugene
You can find me on Twitter at Sql Gene.
and Mr. Kevin.
You can find me at, oh no, my connection's dying. You're not going to hear my social credentials.
Oh no. How totally unexpected.
Just missed out. And
So
compañeros,
close.
The system is protecting itself.
you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon. Let me know when you connect if you're listening, if you're coming from the podcast. That just helps me know. And I try to reach back out to you. Thanks again, Anthony, Ben, for being here. Thanks for taking your time. I've enjoyed the
Thanks
conversation.
for having us. That was fun.
Yes,
Yeah.
thanks for having us.
And compañeros, we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.